Do we love people at the same level if they're skinny, athletic, or obese?
The physical attractiveness bias is huge.
Self-love or self-growth?
Everyone is so confident you have to love yourself before you love other people and grow, right? People say this with 100% certainty.
So many people believe that they are their thoughts.
Anytime you have a self-defeating thought, to ask yourself, okay, if a friend said this to you, how would you respond?
I'm two surrogates right now who are getting pregnant simultaneously, and
Really?
And they'll be technically not be twins, but they're called triplings.
Wow.
Hello and welcome to Becoming Superhuman. Our guest today is a leading psychologist and expert on curiosity and psychological flexibility. He's spoken globally on well-being and leadership, and he's the author of The Art of Insubordination and The Upside of Your Dark Side. His research explores both how rebellion and discomfort are essential for growth and how to turn your fear into creativity and resilience. Please welcome to Becoming Superhuman, Dr. Todd Kashdan. One of the things that you talk a lot about is not shying away from the dark side, right? Like looking at the negative thought patterns that we have or some of the negative emotions. And what I'm sort of interested in is like, what was the inner landscape like, for you as an early kid? What were some of those thought patterns that got embedded in there that you began working with later?
I think what happens is when you're an emotion researcher, you discover that adversity helped you look at things from a more varied perspective. And so as someone who grew up with a single mom raising twin boys in a neighborhood that was 97 to 98% Black, I was the minority. And people have to realize there are bizarre minorities in every culture, right? You've got a neighborhood of atheists and you got one religious person. You got a neighborhood of people who are religious extremists and you've got one atheist person, and you got every combination possible. And so when you live in an environment like that as a little white boy in New York, like me and my brother, you discover really quickly that anxiety is basically your threat detector to make sure you don't get your butt kicked on the way home or the way to school. Guilt is the way basically to realize that while it's good to be a delinquent to fit in, it's good to feel uncomfortable about what you did, that don't engage in that behavior a second time, because your teachers are your way out of this difficult, low opportunity environment that I lived in. And so all those things that encompass being, not having a dad going around, being a minority, being in a tough neighborhood, and being like a very small, gangly little Jewish boy, makes you appreciate that a lot of these so-called negative emotions are incredibly helpful. But even besides just the emotions, you realize that a little bit of narcissism, which is not what a lot of people are talking about in the modern culture, is a lot better than no narcissism. And it's a question I often ask people when I'm in groups, which is that, would you like to be around people that have a 0 on a 0 to 100 scale of narcissism? And then what would that look like? And what it would look like is someone with low confidence, low courage, low leadership ability, and very little agency to do anything.
Well, and what is your working definition of narcissism there? Because that it gets thrown around a lot. And often people say that when someone just has a healthy ego, they have a sense of identity and a clear passion and purpose. But so how do you break that apart from sort of that dose of narcissism versus, say, DSM-5 definition narcissism?
Well, I definitely abide by more of a scientific checklist of like what is high narcissism. So high narcissism is someone that has grandiose beliefs about themselves. There's beliefs about the world in terms of I'm entitled to all sorts of good things. There's low levels of empathy and compassion. There's a relative disregard for social norms and social rules. And so at the extreme end, you can imagine that this is someone that's quarrelsome and difficult to be around. But at moderate to low levels, when you're in a very uncertain environment, this is who you want to be around, because they're going to take the leadership helm and get you out of whatever chaotic situation you're in.
Actually, from out of everything you said, that checklist, Todd, like if empathy was a little bit higher, everything else is great.
Right.
isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you could think of that as a nucleus for problematic to potentially adaptive levels of narcissism. So if you care about other people, and this is like a regular phrase I use in my life. My kids will have problems in school. There'll be someone they don't like on their volleyball team, and I'll say, you can engage in whatever behavior you want to. You don't have to invite everyone to a party. You don't have to be friends with everyone, but just don't step on someone else's well-being. And so that's, Dylan, to your point, like that's the compassion and empathy part. As long as that's intact, be unique and strange and selective and discerning for all the people that you associate with. That's fine.
And so is that something that you had developed for yourself as a child to I mean, it sounds incredibly challenging to grow up in that environment with that adversity. So did you develop this narcissistic characteristic as a self-protection?
This is a great psychotherapy session. I've never been asked this before. I mean, honestly, my quick answer is yes. Is I learned to develop a shell. And I think a lot of boys in particular think about this and develop this. You have this rise of body dysmorphia where boys like to put on, pounds of muscle on their body because it gives the illusion that you could walk through the world strong, unafraid of threats that come at you. And
Oh wow, I had never heard the term body dysmorphia used in that context.
oh, really?
It's like,
Dylan, you're the picture of body dysmorphia.
shit, I'm body dysmorphia, man.
I mean,
It's typically used for in at least what I have heard in the past is that being used in the context of transgender people, right? But it makes sense that there are many different forms of body dysmorphia.
Well, the thing is, it's the same thing for a woman that is engaging in bulimia or anorexic behavior because they're not comfortable with
Right.
their body. It's the same thing for
That's true.
a woman who's post-menopause who bemoans the fact that their body is changing compared to their 18-year-old self. And it's the same thing for, a boy or a man who feels like if I put on 30 pounds of muscle, all of a sudden my psychology is better. And it's nice that in 2025, as we're talking right now, all three are finally addressed. And it really was that third leg of the stool that was being ignored. So yeah, I did all of that. And what the interesting thing, Ben, about that question is you walk around your school environment, you walk around the jobs that I had when I was in my 20s, and nobody had the psychology to pinpoint the motivation behind my obsession for working out at that time. And I find that very interesting. And it's really nice that people now can give a little bit of feedback to a younger person and say, I kind of know the motivation behind what you're doing. I just want you to know, like, I like you, love you, care about you, whether you were skinny, whether you were athletic looking, or whether you were obese. And that's these are very new cultural developments.
Is that true? Like, do we love people at the same level if they're skinny, athletic, or obese?
So great question. The goal is, can you get to a point where you are loved in a certain subset of relationships where someone can feel that way? And even better, that they could articulate it to you, and even better, that you could reciprocally articulate that back. I mean, to me, this is at the crux of what is the most functional relationship you can have. But to answer your question directly, no, like we have all these biases built in, and we have to see the world as it is. And the physical attractiveness bias is huge. And the more you can acknowledge it, then the more you can overcome it. And the scary part always is when people say, oh, no, like I don't even notice. That's the person you should worry about.
Well, so it's interesting though, because on the physical attractiveness bias, because I was as we were preparing for this interview, I was reading through your Twitter, and you mentioned in there that being above average attractiveness results in 10 to 15% increase in your income.
Right.
So it seems like a very I'm surprised more smart people aren't just focused on their physical attractiveness just because it's going to give them such a massive advantage in the world.
It's a great point. So, well, think about this, is that women have figured this out earlier, right? So you have this massive, multi-billion-dollar industries in terms of personal care. if I don't know if there are how many malls exist anymore, but you don't have synonymous stores for boys and men in terms of taking care of yourself. You have gyms, but you don't really have like a place in terms of there are men standing there with mirrors who are incredibly good looking and well dressed and articulate. And they say, hey, you over there, like who's like schlumpy character, let me show you how I could transform yourself physically. That happens there. There's no such thing.
Todd, funny enough, I did go through one such thing.
Do tell.
Yeah.
Very, very quick, very long story. Very quickly, I used to be. I mean, I was a skinny nerd coming out of school and doing my first startup. Had extreme social anxiety and all these things, and then I was at Google and I decided to just like I was like exactly what you're talking about is handicapping my life to such an extreme degree, and the life I would live if I live the way I'm living right now is just like so much subpar to the optimal life that I could create if I completely change a number of these things and transform myself to a more beautiful person or whatever, right? And and I ended up basically going through a quest. I moved to New York, started taking acting classes and all these things, and ended up running into a bunch of guys who are starting a boot camp for men to become more charismatic. And ended up moving to Brazil with them and spending 8 months practicing everything from working out to eating well to meditation to social skills, etc. And yeah, I mean, I came back and most of my friends, including Ben, was like, "What the fuck happened to you, Dylan?" In a good way. And those guys went on to start a very successful YouTube channel called Charisma Academy, or Charisma on Command. I think like a lot of people know about this channel. So yeah, it does exist, but hard to find.
Well, I have so many questions, but wait, Dylan, and I apologize. This just because you brought up Ben and that Ben was surprised. Ben, what was like one or two things that when Dylan came back, you were like, oh my God, you're so much better on X and Y.
Yeah, I liked him so much more afterwards. No, I'm when Dylan arrived in my life, he you have to imagine he was sort of like fresh off the boat, skinny MIT nerd that he was so afraid to speak to women. He wouldn't even speak to my mother. And then when he came back, he was ripped and smiling and confident and talking to the fairer sex. And so I've just seen him come out of his shell, right. And be able to develop community and things like that. So it's just, I think the thing that I feel is embedded in this that's actually really important is that there's a way to go about this where you're actually loving and caring for yourself, right? So part of it can be from vanity or body dysmorphia, but there's also a way that you could work out or care for how you look that's healthy, right?
Yeah.
And so I think Dylan does it for both reasons, but the effect's positive.
I think one of the things that we do society-wise that is problematic but seemingly beneficial is we undermine when someone does something positive for themselves. It's for an extrinsic reason, right? You do it for vanity, you do it to get attention, you do it to be loved, as opposed to like intrinsically, I just am curious and intrigued and like, this is really important to me. And what I would say is, instead of looking at the process and the underlying motivation, there's a benefit to looking at the outcome. So if Dylan goes for 8 months to better himself and he comes back socially effervescent, interesting in conversation, better in terms of persuasion and negotiation, more likely to bring joy to other people, that's the outcome we should care about, even if it came from a place of vanity of I want to look good, feel good, compared to my younger, geekier self.
Yeah.
Todd, this brings us to a question that I actually really want to ask you. What do you think comes first or could come first, practically speaking, self-love or self-growth?
What's interesting about this question is everyone is so confident you have to love yourself before you love other people and grow, right? People say this with 100% certainty, and it's an empirical question. And if, as a scientist, as long as a dad, friend, and and everything else that goes on with me, is that when I look at the science, it can go either direction. Like there's no uniform way for this to happen. And I would say it is perfectly okay not to love yourself at first, even loathe yourself. And with that motivation, actually try to do good things in the world to distract yourself, to escape the self. Again, looking at the outcome as opposed to the process. And I think it's disingenuous to say, first you have to start with this 5-10 year mission of adoring yourself and loving all your qualities. Well, some of us have a lot of baggage. And I would say, like, don't give away your moments of fulfillment to reach this zenith where you have this complete self-acceptance before you do things. If you feel you can contribute now, start now.
I love that answer. I think you're absolutely right. In popular culture, the idea of self-love is very important, but held up a little too high up in a pedestal at the cost of, like, you just have to fix that for everything else. But that's just practically not how it works for most people. And acknowledging it is quite freeing, I think.
Yeah. I mean, the best example that probably, hopefully, in my dream world, everyone thinks of is like Michael Jordan, right? So here you have possibly the greatest basketball player of all time. He gets into the Hall of Fame. And what was the content of his speech as he's at the podium, at the pinnacle, the end of this amazing career, is all he talks about: everyone who hated him, everyone who rejected him, everyone who was his adversary. And it's complete pure negativity. And he says towards the end, that motivated me towards greatness. That's fine. We got Michael Jordan. What other Michael Jordans? The Michael Jordan of the publishing industry, the Michael Jordan of libraries, the Michael Jordan of architecture. Like, I don't want to stop them because of some disingenuous motivational quote, "Love yourself first."
And this reminds me a little exercise that you took the audience through during your TED Talk, where you ask them to bring up a belief that they have, a negative belief that they have about themselves, and then train them really quickly to be the observer of that belief, in a sense, right? As opposed to kind of hold the belief like so tight. And I feel like the lesson there is actually, maybe you can go into the lesson there. Like, what's the daily practice here that you want people to develop?
By the way, Dylan, you were very attentive. I can tell you have like the opposite of ADHD. So, I mean, the really important part is that a lot of things that we think are core to our identity are loose threads that we can notice and realize they don't define us at all. And one of the greatest places to look is this internal chatter we have inside our head. And so when we think to ourselves, like for me, for example, while I am very athletic, my balance is terrible. So I can lift big things, throw big things. Most of the sports I played, like shot put, my whole thing was just throw a 16-pound ball as far as I can. And I won a lot of things, including entry into a college. But put me on a surfboard, put me on a skateboard, and my neighbors would regularly tell me, "Listen, Todd, how big is your life insurance? Because you are terrifying to watch." And I could have the thought, I have the thought, which is like, you're not designed to do anything that involves balance. You should never be on a skateboard. You should never be on a surfboard. And to be able to observe the thought, to go with, this notion of cognitive diffusion, is I'm having a thought that I'm not good at surfing. I'm having a thought that I'm not good at skateboarding. I notice that I'm having a thought. There's some part of my identity that could observe silliness that my brain produces and doesn't realize you need to develop the skill. Not you're bad at it. You have no training. No one's ever coached you. And look, you can still take the risk of going down a hill despite having like 3 out of 100 in skill right now. That's pretty cool. And so you can train, just imagine a world where instead of just, math, reading, and arithmetic, you train kids to realize the fluidity of their thoughts and feelings and how it can potentially not get in the way of action.
I love that. It's almost like, Rene Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. And Todd is saying, you are not your thoughts.
I never thought about that.
I am, therefore I think.
Huh?
I am, therefore I think. That's the...
I
the other way to
I
go about
love
it.
the contrast. I haven't thought about that before, but it's so true how wrong that is. Thank you for that. It's a gift.
So something I'm sort of curious about is how did you cultivate this in yourself, right? So many people believe that they are their thoughts, right? They have a thought. I mean, one of my pernicious thoughts was, you're not smart enough. And it was just in there all the time. And I remember I just believed that's who I am, and that all the things that I was doing were sort of in my own best interest. And in a sense they are, but when I started recognizing these thoughts, I was like, holy shit, if someone external was saying this to me, I'd punch him in the face. So how did you develop this for yourself and start to create that observer aspect?
Well, just because I love the concreteness of what you described, let me flip the order of this. You just described the
Yeah.
intervention, which is anytime you have a self-defeating thought, to ask yourself, okay, if a friend said this to you, how would you respond? It's very quick.
Yeah.
It's non-observable or visible to anyone else. And within less than a minute, you could transform that moment. So just for anyone listening, like that's a really good strategy. And you'll find you beat yourself up way too much. My answer is sort of cliche, which is, and by the way, Ben, I was destroyed by that same thought because when I was in high school, my twin brother got into Cornell University. This was back in the day before the internet, and we all got the letters the same day, thick or thin envelope, and then 7 of us at my high school applied early decision to Cornell. 1, 2, 3, we all opened it. 6 of 7, except for me, all got in. I was the only one not to get in. And we had to wait for the bell to go in. They were cheering. It was like they were in like an EDM dance party, and then there's me, like just ruining the party. And so from then on, I really had this strong belief of like, I'm not as smart as my brother. I'm not as smart as these people who I don't think are that smart in the first place. And so it took a long time for me to actually develop enough confidence where I didn't have to use 4-syllable words and sound smart and mention books when I'm talking, and eventually like just like for it to drop out of the equation and actually try to talk like a common person so people could understand the things that I'm actually trying to reflect towards them. It took a while. And I think where it came from is really close friends, loving people, mentors who just kind of slap you around and just say, Todd, how could you not think that you're undeserving of this award, attention, like accomplishment? Like, how could you say that it's luck? And I was fortunate to have enough people that would not just say that, which wouldn't work on me. And I'm curious if words alone did it for you. But for me, they would provide behavioral evidence and they would list the details of like, listen, this is why. This is the average number of publications of someone who's a second-year grad student. This is what people's typical like research program is when they're 21 years of age. Look at what you've done. And so in that way, it's hard to refute the evil, pernicious thought in your head.
Yeah, I mean, my journey around this, I have a particular viewpoint on this because this is sort of where I spend most of my time. Is, I mean, for one thing, we need to develop what Daniel P. Brown from Harvard would call metacognitive awareness. So like awareness of what we're thinking, right, or thinking about thinking, like Descartes said. But so, because most of the time it's sort of unconscious, like you're on the thought train and you're going. And so for one thing, meditation and that actual practice of doing concentration meditation developed more metacognitive awareness for me, so I could sort of catch these thoughts faster. And so that helped a lot. And sure, you could do cognitive behavioral therapy or like Byron Katie's work and write down the opposite of thoughts. And that's sort of helpful a bit. But for me, a lot of it is just like allowing myself to understand what's the positive intention behind the thought. Like it's a negative thing, but it's actually wanting me to do something positive.
Yeah.
I believe that all our beliefs get written in when we're little, because in the context in which we were existing in, that was a useful thought or behavior. and then at some point it no longer serves us.
Yeah.
Right. And so then you can drop into just feeling the emotion underneath it. And so that's sort of a lot of the resilience training I do is like, oh, I have that thought. And then what's the emotion? Oh, I'm feeling afraid. Right. Like that thought is, I'm in some threat state in this room. I'll be discovered. I'll be kicked out. I'm afraid of being ashamed or something like that. And then moving through that. And then once I can move through those emotions, then I notice that my prefrontal cortex sort of kicks back online and I can start to think. So if I don't assign truth to the thought and I just move through the emotional state, then I can get through it. And then that stuff starts to wind down if you just do a million repetitions.
Yeah, this is a good combination of the two strategies, because yours is focusing on like truth or falsehood, and then cognitive diffusion is you're just changing your relationship with the thoughts irrespective of if it's true. Like you can notice a thought that's accurate, which is you're really skinny, right? You have too many birthmarks. It's kind of gross. You have hairs that grow out of those birthmarks, even grosser. You can notice that thought, and then all of a sudden it's not as charged. It's like, okay, that's just one of like thousands of thoughts I'm going to have today. And so those are two very different. And if you have both of those skills, you start to develop this real psychological toolbox.
Yeah. And so maybe one thing that you could do for our listeners is could you walk us through your recipe for how to work with, I guess, what you call a dark side thought?
Well, so let's say that you get into an argument with one of your colleagues and you're enraged by this. And so first you want to do is, as you said, have the metacognitive awareness to be able to, can you describe succinctly, like in a few words, like what that thought is? And you can say, I despise Jake. So I hate Jake, right? Make it simple, make it like kid-like. I hate Jake. And then sit with that. Let it kind of marinate, experience everything as you're saying, Ben, like what it motivates you to do, right? Does it motivate you to want to hit them? Does it motivate you to want to slam the door on them? Does it motivate you to want to talk smack about them? Just stick with it. Don't try to change it. And then just add in front of it, I'm having the thought that I hate Jake. And I just notice what happens to that motivation to take action, retribution. And then that's not quite accurate. So you want to add a little bit more in front. I notice I'm having the thought that I hate Jake. And all of a sudden you're having this distancing where you're the thinker. There's this thought, this space. I notice I'm having the thought I hate Jake. And all of a sudden you feel like much further away from this. And you can kind of think to yourself of, oh, well, that's just for today. Well, that's just because of this one thing. Like, I don't really hate Jake. I just didn't like what he said to me or how he said it. And so when you have this distance, it allows you to actually plug in alternative explanations and give yourself like an out to not just be in this approach attack mode or avoid escape from threat mode, and really be able to sit with it. Because all therapy is, if you had to get it down to three things, is this: notice what's going on, sit with it, alter the perspective on it. That's all therapy is. So you don't really need a therapist if you can just know those three steps and figure out which is the hardest one for you right now. Is it the noticing? Is it the sitting? Sitting tends to be really difficult for most people. And then can you get another perspective? So you could ask your close friend, right? What, in terms of like before Dilan went for 8 months to Brazil, he could have went to you and said, Ben, what do you think I should improve on? And if you convince Dilan nothing, like I really think you're on the path to greatness exactly as you are, maybe Dilan doesn't spend all that money and all that time going to Brazil. Or maybe you're a really good friend and could say, you know what? I love you, but here's a few things that if you got better at these, you would be much better.
If you had better abs, I would love you even more, Dilan.
Just those
Todd,
fatty obliques.
Yeah.
And you've talked about this before, building a wise counsel around yourself of people who are willing to give you, tell you the truth, right? How does one do that? How do you find such people? Because not everyone will. And two, how do you become such a person that tells people the truth This reminds me of that book, Courage to be Disliked, about Adlerian
Great book.
psychology, and great book. And yet, I personally have a lot of trouble putting into practice, lot of trouble, and I'm very oriented towards personal growth. But this is one of my hills to climb. I'm still struggling with. So how do you
I love
develop
that
that?
you reveal this on this podcast. This is great. It's so both are extremely hard. So let me just so I think making friends is relatively easy. That's another conversation. I think the wise counsel is a lot harder, and very few people should get in there. And actually, I'm going to alter the question a little bit. Is like how discerning should you be, and who gets the wise counsel? I would say very, because if everyone fits in there, my guess is you're not having hard enough conversations. And to go back to what Ben said, you're probably not being meta aware enough of like what are the issues that are infecting you, because really you shouldn't go by in a single week without some difficulty if you're really paying attention to you in relation to the world. And so in terms of developing the wise counsel, you really have to give people outs, and there's these individual tests that people have of can they actually describe the thing that's bothersome about you, or what they're feeling and thinking that bothers them about you. And so the way that you give people an out is you could say, um, listen, one thing I'm having a problem with is I have a short temper, and I know you don't want to tell me what's going on, but I will be upset at you if you don't tell me at least one thing that you think triggers me to make me get more indignant or rage filled or pissed off at the world. Is like, I'm not walking away until you give me at least something that goes in there. Like, that's the way that you'll give me a gift. It will not be a gift to me if you say, no, you're fine, that goes in there. So with this out, what do people do on a regular basis? And the people that are in my wise counsel, you give them an out and they'll tell me exactly what it is. And often, to flip that around, they'll often give a caveat of like, listen, let me know if you want to hear this, because I have some feedback that I think is going to bother you, but I think it's going to be helpful for you. Not right now, but like a couple weeks from now when it sits in. And so eventually your wise counsel starts to do that. And that's really the skill for being a member of someone else's wise counsel, is you have to ask them, do you want me to just listen to what you're saying? Or do you want me to give you some feedback right now in terms of things that could help you do this better next time versus what just happened? And if people keep on picking, I just
Yeah.
want you to listen, that's fine. Well, I mean, they might not be ready for problem solving, or they may not want it from you, or it might be something else that happens there. But really being a good wise counsel member is making sure people are in the right space.
And Todd, it's even harder when people are actually not asking for feedback, right? Because that's what you have to do all the time as a CEO or a manager, and that's personally I struggle with that a lot, and yeah, and it's just hard. I don't know if there's like anything else to add there, um,
I've
as the mindset that I should develop around
Yeah,
that.
this is my favorite strategy. I call it, Robert and I call it, from the upside of your dark side, the discomfort caveat. And I also believe this is, well, I
Mhm.
don't believe it, the science shows it. This is how to be very persuasive in group meetings when your ideas deviate from what the norm is, or the status quo, or what most people are thinking. It's really hard to be the person that stands up and says, hey, before we move in this direction, I know everyone's in agreement, I have some thoughts. So one way of being, so the immediate response to that is, nobody likes long meetings. Can you please just clap down and not say what you're going to say so we can go home? So in order for this to work, you initially start off of saying, I have to tell you, I've listened to what everyone said, and I'm extremely anxious even bringing this up. Like honestly, like my heart's racing a little bit. I can actually feel a little bit of tension in my legs, but it's so important to me. I would be remiss if I didn't say something. Now, this discomfort caveat that you put up front, what it does is it brings people's defenses down. And so the only thing you could ask for when you're offering feedback to an individual that you know they probably would rather not experience, or you're the minority in a room in terms of your thoughts, and you know that the room would rather just go the course without you saying anything, is the only thing you could ask for is for them to listen and elaborate on your idea. ask some questions and elaborate on it, but there is no requirement whatsoever for them to agree or adopt anything you're going to say. And you have to have that mindset when you go in there. And so you can give that feedback to someone, but you don't control how they're going to respond to it. And so that's a different form of helping them regulate themselves separate from the feedback.
This is awesome. I really appreciate this, Todd. And also I think it's so applicable, right? It feels clear how to use it. One of the questions that I have is, what is your personal filter for who gets on your counsel and who doesn't?
That is a really good question. I mean, one of them is I have respect for their intellect. So it's not their intelligence levels. It's not their wisdom levels. It's that I respect. I've seen it in action. I've observed it. And like, I want to be around that. And it's really important because you want to distinguish between who is what I call a socially attractive person and who is socially valuable to you. Now, there might be some overlap between the two, but there might be no overlap whatsoever. The socially attractive person to me is like the Fonz. I don't know who the modern Fonz is, but it's whoever is like, you know, they have the charisma, they're interesting. And you know, like at the end of the day, in any workplace you've ever been at, like this is the person they say, hey, Jess, do you want to go out for a drink? Do you want to meet up afterwards? We were going to go play softball afterwards. Like they get called on. Like that's the socially attractive person. People want to sit next to them at the meeting, at lunch that goes in there. But Jess isn't necessarily the ideal person for you in terms of her strength profile, knowledge, and wisdom to be of use to you. And obviously everything you try to make them as reciprocal as possible of you being of use to Jess. And so it's really like, do you value their perspective, their lens of the world? That to me is the ultimate first filter.
I like that as a filter. The way that I've thought about this, like I curate my friend group pretty intentionally, is, do they have character traits that I want to embody? And it could be in different domains, right? Some people nail integrity. Some people are tremendously creative, or they have a particular way of that they love and care for people. And so I sort of look at those and figure out what qualities they have that I would like to have more of, right? And it just, can I absorb it through osmosis?
It speaks volumes about you, Ben. So when I left New York Stock Exchange floor on Wall Street and switched to psychology, the very first study I did was what makes people attracted to people who are complementarity, what you were describing, like complementing strengths versus a similar overlap of strengths. Like what makes you choose, like a lot of people choose simulacrums of themselves. You're just like me, but you're taller and you're better at basketball. And so what we found was that if you can satisfy someone's need to feel that they are valued and they have a sense of belonging, then people tend to deviate and choose people that are dissimilar to them to spend time with. Now, when people are still, I don't mean this to sound like a negative statement, but if you're still obsessed about being having like deep, significant relationships and you're accepted in the world, if you're still dealing with that, then it's really hard to choose dissimilar people. You just want anyone who's just going to basically give you some validation, give you some head nods, throw some smiles your way. But once you pass that, you get to you get to your state, which is, I want people that have strengths and qualities that I wish, I'm almost envious that I have. Like I always think of this is why the evolutionary adaptiveness of enviness exists. You feel envy because someone has a quality that is so impressive that you get like enraged almost, because you're like, I want that. How do I get that? And I think about that when I'm doing public speaking and I see someone that has a better storyteller than me, or more eloquent than me, or speaking quicker sound bites than me. You get envious, but then it's like, I want to be around them because I want that to rub off on me, as you were describing.
That's awesome. Todd, there's a whole bucket of things I wanted to ask you about raising children and the broader topic of the coddling of the American mind. But before that, I want to start with a personal question. You had a twin brother, and I think you have twin children.
Yeah, twin 18-year-old daughters.
Yeah, right. Most people don't plan to have twins. It's more or less an accident, but I am. And
Don't do it.
I have two surrogates right now.
That's what we've all told him this, Todd. But
I'm two. I'm two surrogates right now who are getting pregnant simultaneously,
Really?
and they'll be technically not be twins, but they're called triplings, and
Wow.
yeah. So I guess I was going to ask you if you recommend it.
what now? No.
Maybe
By
we
the way,
talk. We can
Dylan,
talk
you
about.
are dissenting here. Literally
I am
everyone you've
dissenting. Yeah.
mentioned this to has told you not to do
Wait,
this.
Dylan, I've never heard of this before. This is intentionally designing a set of twins.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Fascinating.
I'm.
You are crazy.
Yeah. I'm increasing production capacity and parallel processing. And so
I so wish I was the podcast host right now.
Wait. I mean, ask him some questions, please. Let's turn this around. This will be a new segment where.
Okay, good. Okay, because I've never heard this before. So, wait, Dylan, do you have any other kids?
I don't have any other kids.
Okay, great. This makes it even more interesting then. So when you imagine at 2 years in, right? 2 years in, so they're just starting to get up and move around. These little blobs. They're just busting out a few words here. How are you imagining two satisfying happiness, meaning, joy more than one?
Oh, I don't really. I actually imagine it to be total chaos. But I do imagine that one thing that I've observed over and over with my friends who are live in the city, especially, they don't have the village that they one used to raise a child with, and they're having their first child, and I see so much time that they spend interacting with the child at the child's level, because the child has no one else to interact with, right? And that's not how it was supposed to happen. Kids were supposed to hang out all day with like other kids, right? In the village. And so while I can't create the village, in my case there'll at least be two, and I think that there'll be like a little bit of solace there, and I primarily want them to have that experience, and yeah, so
what
that's one of the big motivations.
No, I have more questions, but so what I'm hearing is you want to design an 80-year hangout for kid A with kid B, right from the get-go.
Yeah.
Because I know how challenging this is to have twins. How are you planning the division of labor for the not so fun parts, like beyond just coaching the soccer team and the volleyball team?
I'm planning to outsource a lot of it.
Okay.
Basically, my mom is going to move in with us, and this is like a really great thing. I love, love to spend more time with her, and we have a separate unit for her, and I will have a full-time nanny. Maybe I'll get 2 full-time nannies if I need to. So yeah.
If you write an autobiographical book about what you expected from this experience and what actually happens, I need to read this.
It sounds like I might have to, because I've been asked this question too many times. But like, tell me about a little bit of the upside of being a twin or having twins, Todd. It cannot be all downside.
No, it's really like, can you deal with the first 2 years of disarray for like a lifetime of more interesting, engaging moments? I mean, that's really what it comes. Those first couple of years with twins. I mean, you're going to have a nice zone defense, so you're pretty okay for this. But if you didn't have the resources that you have, I mean, it's a lot more challenging. I
actually planned this consciously, Todd. I'm turning 43, and
you look good.
A little bit late to have children. And thank you, appreciate it. And I decided to be an older parent, quote unquote. For 2 reasons. One, I don't think I'm going to die, at least, not at 80 or 120, probably like 500. I don't know. And so I can actually plan my life in a longer time horizon. But 2, there are so much upside to being an older parent. Older parents are actually better parents. They're wiser. They're just like gentler with their kids. They don't helicopter parent as much because they have kind of
You're
come
not
to
as
terms with,
mobile.
like yeah, exactly how life is. And it keeps you younger, turns out. Kids really kind of give you kind of life almost, just like older parents have better health metrics. And also resources is a huge thing, right? Like by the time, like, as opposed to having kids in your 20s, for example, by the time you're in your 40s, you have a lot more resources. So I can literally, I will do the diaper changing, because it will be satisfying and it will be a thing that I should do. But then when I don't feel like doing the diaper changing, I'll just outsource it.
The level of thoughtfulness in this, I mean, Dylan, I'm really impressed with you and your partner, like to come up with this. I mean, this is if someone can pull this off, I think it's you. The thing is that
Thank you.
you can never understand 0 to 1 until it happens. Trying to explain to
Right.
people that aren't parent, what's a strange thing is, I got my PhD in clinical psychology. I was just talking about this the other day, and part of my my training as a psychologist was to take these practicums where I would do particular types of therapy. So I did couples therapy before I was married. That's strange. But stranger, I did parent-child interaction therapy as a 27-year-old in grad school. And the fact that any parent listened to me about anything, like just things I would read in books, it just boggles my mind that people would do it. But because until you understand, first of all, there's a couple parts, right? One is that you can't understand like the growth in your aorta, the capacity to love. You don't realize like it's this non-zero sum game and it's very expansive. And then because of the love you have for your kids, which you would do anything for, it really does influence your other relationships to realize I'm going to make sure that our moments aren't wasted together because it's time away from my kids. So you get very good at more meaningful conversation, more meaningful moments. And then similarly, in terms of your choice of activities and hobbies, and even like travel, like I just got back from the country of Georgia giving a workshop on curiosity, and everyone was like, wait, you're only going for 3 days? I'm like, yeah, because my 13-year-old has a volleyball tournament. Like, I don't want to miss the volleyball game. And so there's no loss. It's basically two beautiful things back to back, but it's not the loss of a luxury. It's that there's so much meaning packed into my week that I'm going to choose very carefully, splice up when one moment ends and another one ends. And that level of optimization, it's probably the wrong word because it makes it sound like you're trying to take advantage of your calendar, but really it's trying to take advantage of your life. And that's like one of the beauties of having children, but you can't explain that to someone that doesn't have kids.
I love that. Yeah, thank you, Todd. I'm looking forward.
Me too.
I do. Yeah, I do want to talk to you about
first twibbling experiment ever in history, right? So Dylan couldn't have kids until he could find a way to do it that no one else has ever done. That's
I do want to ask you about, as a researcher, psychologist, all of your learnings, how have those applied to raising your children, right? So I was at an event just this Saturday, and I was talking to a very successful entrepreneur of Asian origin, ethnically, and he was like, I'm going to take my kids off of school and I'm going to start homeschooling. I'm like, wow, like that's a lot of effort. Why are you doing that? And he was like, look, like when I was growing up, I had to do mental math, right? I had to throw myself at difficult problems that are science problems, and I had to like bang my head against these things until I came to, I had to like just like do the work to get through, like, put up with pain for a certain amount of time so that I can get that reward at the end. And his observation with what's going on with schools is that that's not what is happening with in the American school system today. It's more like making kids feel good, like way before they kind of, struggled through that kind of like, difficult period of like kind of doing the work. And you see this in grade inflation, right? Grades have inflated like crazy over the last
that
6
Harvard
years.
study was
And now
wild.
everyone's getting an A. Yeah. So I'm curious about your thoughts about this whole bucket of things, right? What's your philosophy around parenting? How do you introduce difficulty and grit to your kid's life, and how do you think the school system should address these
Yeah, I mean,
things?
we this could be a 17-hour conversation. I mean, there was
Yeah.
the first clinical trial ever came out just a couple months ago of Carmelo. Is it Carmelo Ortiz? Anyway, it's called independence therapy, and it's the idea of one of the things that we should be doing with our children is, opposed to exposing them to things that are fearful or threats, is exposing them to moments where they are left to their own devices to kind of be independent. And I've done this all of my child's life. So just as a concrete example, since they could speak, I always had them give their order to the waiter or the waitress. And they were shy. They put their head down. They couldn't make eye contact. And you have to sit with it as a parent and just be like, and I'd whisper in their ear and say, listen, like you can do this. I've seen you talk to strangers before. Like, they are here. We're paying for their services. So they're like paid to be our friends. So just see what happens. If it goes well, I will give you a dessert afterwards. And it started off with like, I give them rewards in the beginning. Cause it's like very intimidating to talk to a person who almost like, I don't know if Peanuts cartoons are beyond our age, but there's this adult, you can't even see their head because they're so much taller. They're standing, you're sitting, and my kids would whimper out their menu. Usually the person had to ask like 6 or 7 times what they said. And sometimes I would say, oh, I think what they said was chicken nuggets and macaroni and cheese. And then afterwards, I'd be like, you see it? Like, you did it. And then the next time you refer back to the previous time. And like, listen, remember last time? What ended up happening? They heard you, they smiled, you got a brownie sundae. And then over time, what happens is that scaffolding starts to impact other parts of their lives where all of a sudden someone comes to the door and you can say to your kid, listen, can you tell them now's not a good time and have them leave? And, and over time, they get enough independent experiences, get exposed to it, where all of a sudden they're 18 years of old, they're freshmen in college, and they're the only ones, or one of the only ones of their friends that knows how to go to urgent care by themselves, knows how to balance their money, knows how to invest in Charles Schwab stock accounts. Because I've been training my kids like their whole lives to have little bits of independence. And they always tell me like, Dad, you cannot believe, like, nobody has a credit card on my entire dorm floor except for me. And to me, it's whatever the culture is, this is the Tao. Like, the path is, you want your kids to be independent of you eventually. And because you don't know if you're going to live to 150. My guess is, Dilan, you're not going to live to 150 or 500. That happens there. And so in this case, I want to know that I did the best possible job, that they can basically go off on their own adventures and explorations on their own, knowing that not only am I not going to be there, but I don't even want to be there because I shouldn't be there. That happens there. And part of this, I realize I'm babbling a little bit, but this is so near and dear to me, is when they make really bad errors, how you respond determines whether you lose intel or you keep getting intel. So I'm not going to throw my own kids under the bus. So let's say everything I'm going to say right now is hypothetical. So let's say that your kid is in high school and they go to a party and they try cocaine for the first time. It's illegal. We know that happens there. So your kid's still alive. They come home. You recognize it. There's some little behavioral residue, so it's clear. How do you respond? Now, most parents in public would say the exact right thing. I would punish them. They'd be grounded. But in reality, in private and closed door, if you go that route and you're focused totally on a penal colony system in your house, what's going to happen is they're not going to do it less. You're just not going to hear about it. And you're also not going to get intel on risky sexual behavior, delinquent behavior, strange things that their friends do, and very difficult situations that they think that you're going to have an aversive response to. So my response has always been, how can I teach them without losing any intel for future events?
I think that's a pretty good litmus test for your own behavior as a parent. One thing I have a 6-year-old, and one of the things that I think about is essentially like, how do I maximize my son's ability to explore without causing serious harm to himself, right? Because to me, a lot of parents sort of over rotate on the safety side, right, where it's like, I don't want any harm to come to my child, to the point that you're not leading them towards a world where they're independent, right? Like my goal is that he can be a successful human. So he's got to be able to navigate, physical and psychological danger, have tools to be able to, take his dreams and turn them into reality. And so if I shut that down, oh, don't climb that tree, right? Then they never develop the ability that you're seeking. At the same time, like when my son climbs a tree, I just observe, and if I need to, I'll stand under there, right, so I can catch him and break his fall. But it's like, I don't want him to break a bone, but less than that, it's okay.
I mean, that's right. And then, literally, you are the scaffolding for the tree. I mean, that's really the appropriate response. I mean, yeah. I realize that there are parents in terms of a cost benefit analysis, if they injure themselves and break their leg, that's more damaging than them not doing it. And I think you have the right perspective I think parents need to expand the time horizon. It's not about this moment of your 6-year-old climbing the tree. It's that, are they going to go through the world more approach-oriented than avoidant-oriented? And parents accidentally put their finger on the scale of like avoid. And then guess what? Why is it no surprise that we have a rise in anxiety disorders and depressive disorders and loneliness? It's because you are under socializing. You are taking too few risks, and you are assuming that having a conversation with a stranger is so effortful and it's going to be so awkward and so difficult that you choose not to do it. Well, guess what? Now you have a smaller social network. Now you have fewer weak ties. Now you have fewer opportunities in terms of if you needed a job or an internship or just to find out things about the world. And the quickest way to find things out about the world is through talking to other people. And the parent who decided not to let their kid climb the tree, they started that trajectory that could lead to all of those lost opportunities.
So one question that I have, Dylan, let me just grab this follow up. Is we have a lot of entrepreneurs and leaders that listen to the podcast, and many of them that when I coach them, they struggle with things just like this, right? Doing all the outreach they need to do, or when you're pitching, raising money. I mean, a lot of people, and including myself, sort of describe it as getting punched in the face. So what guidance would you have for them for developing distress tolerance, right? Being able to be with this discomfort and sort of building that muscle if they didn't get exactly the right parenting early in life.
I love the language that you're using here. I think one important thing is to realize you don't get necessarily do-overs, but you do have a long period in the aftermath of events to have reflection and be able to respond long after something happened. So let's go with like your example that happens there. Let's say that you don't get funding, you take a risk, you tell a story, it ends up being like you misinterpreted what people are going to like and dislike, and so they just don't like you in this moment. That happens there. So in the aftermath of that, you could send an email 17 days later to those people and say, listen, I thought about what happened. I just want to say, of course, I'm disappointed about not losing the funding, but I made an error. I want you to understand where I'm coming from. I thought, like, reading your biography that you would be into this, and it ends up like it backfired. I'm not asking you for anything. I don't want anything. I just want you to know that it was a mistake on my part that happened there. That's part of, this thing that I don't think we give enough attention to, which is maturity, is that you can apologize months later, years later. And I think we forget that we often bring closure to events prematurely. And because of that, we lose growth opportunities, and we also lose potential social relationships. And I know that when I'm on I think all three of us could probably say, when you're on the receiving end of someone apologizing to you 3 weeks later, the first thing that I think of is, wow, like, that's pretty impressive that you were still thinking about this, and you have this caring side that I didn't see in the first time, but I forgot this overrides whatever thoughts and feelings I had with you earlier that happens there. And yet we make this miscalibrated social cognition that if I was to do that, I would be weak, I would be vulnerable, I would be exposed, and you wouldn't like it. And I want everyone listening to know is that it's a miscalibrated thought, and you actually are more likely to be liked, more likely to be seen generous, and more likely to be appreciated when you engage in these kind of reconciliatory behaviors.
Let me see if I can take an example and we test it with this to understand how to apply it. I was when Dilan and I started our company. This was back in 2008, 2009. Dilan was living on a street called Roush Street, and then 2 floors up there was this other company called Airbnb that also just started, and so we sort of got to know them a little bit. And Brian tells a story about how the CEO tells a story about how when he started telling people about the idea for Airbnb, most people were like, boy, I really hope you've got other ideas that you're working on. And so there's this challenge that we have as founders where so many people don't believe in the idea, and then we have to believe in it. So how does he apply that when he's getting a no? If some founder has the next sort of Airbnb idea.
Yeah. So, okay, this is a good example because it's very challenging, right? At what point do you realize that it's time to pivot and do something else? At what point do you realize potentially is that no is accurate or that no is inaccurate? So it's actually it's a very complicated question. So the quick response is, I have no freaking idea. That's the quick, real response. So getting into the molecular details in terms of building this trust tolerance is be careful of prematurely overly weighting the first few, the primacy, the first few responses, and then at the end of the game, the last few responses. So we are cognitively wired to have this bias to overly weight the first few and the last few. And we just the middle just gets ignored that happens there. So in this example of Airbnb, and I've read this story as well, is however they were able to do it, to recognize that these first few responses is basically you have no idea how to think about this new way of approaching homes, and living spaces. This is a new way of thinking. So the initial response is to support and justify the current system. That's what people do. So if you think about that from ahead of time, system justification is often the initial response to something novel. Then wait until you get not one, multiple responses that are different than system justification before you make a determination of the value or quality of your idea. It can't just be a no. It has to be what's an alternative explanation other than it's not going to work, and see if it is valid, because you're initially going to get just a bunch of, and I want to give this terminology, system justification beliefs is what you're going to get first. And so wait till you get multiple deviations from that before you decide thumbs up or thumbs down on the idea. And that's going to build 2 things. One, distress tolerance, and 2 is regularly think of the status quo bias will not be the reason I choose not to invest and take a risk.
So that's great. And this leads me to one of the questions that I was interested in, because psychological biases seems to be an area of interest for you, and certainly is for me. I mean, these ways that our mind sort of can deceive us a little bit from reality. I'm curious, do you have a few favorites that you really wish that more people knew about and could correct for these biases?
Oh my God, so many of them. I mean, so everyone hears about motivated reasoning. I think what happens is when you're an emotion researcher, you discover that adversity helped you look at things from a more varied perspective. And so as someone who grew up with a single mom raising twin boys in a neighborhood that was 97 to 90, found other sources that agree with you. Well, you intentionally limited the pool of ideas and the pool of people in the first place. So everybody talks about that. For me, one of the things that I'm really intrigued by is group bias. And that's the notion that your group in general has good ideas and has better ideas than other groups, because the more you identify with the group, the more that you view that the intelligence and the wisdom and the lack of biases exist in your group compared to other groups. So we all have this group bias. So there's two ways of defeating this, or reducing it. And one of them is, don't identify too strongly with the group. I've trained, and Dylan, this goes back to your question earlier. Like, I've trained my girls not to adopt my same views about politics or religion or any of these big systems, but more of that, I want you to be a critical consumer of information everywhere, but in particular, most of all, the groups that you identify the strongest with. I want you to be comfortable being the minority of one. So all of my kids were sort of forced to be athletes, because you learn so much about leadership and you develop so many strengths, even if you suck. So I'm a strong believer of, your kids should be exposed to athletics, or at the minimum, if you really disagree with that, then you can choose like the arts, like theater or something like that, because it has commonalities there. But in that is, your team is often wrong. And so one thing that I've had real fun doing with my kids over the years, and Ben, this all links up together, is whichever one of my three daughters is playing a sport, I'd often sit with my other two, and the ref would make a call on the field, and we'd be in the home stands, and then everybody would go nuts. Parents would go screaming at the ref, like, you made such a bad call, you're terrible, get some contact lenses. And then I'd whisper to them, you think that call was accurate or inaccurate? Ignore everybody else here. And then my daughter would turn to me like, oh, no, that was the right call. I'm like, I know. And so just like that, game after game after game, they learn over time distress tolerance, deviating from the crowd, being an independent, autonomous thinker, reducing this groupiness bias that I'm talking about here, which is that you don't have to scream to the other parents that, you're all wrong. You don't realize how biased you are in your thinking. But I just want my kids to be able to privately, in their writings, in their thinking, and when they're actually producing work, tune out everybody else. You saw, I saw. Can we like reduce that groupiness bias and see, like, was that actually really like a foul that happened there? Yeah, I didn't think so either. And it's like some of my favorite moments. I mean, you can see me smiling as I'm just telling you this. Just like it's as opposed to in the classroom. What a great environment to expose your kid of being a minority of one.
I love that, and I'm curious if we could sort of package this up as a 7-day challenge to our listeners to learn to counter group bias. Like, what would that be? What would you want someone to do each day?
Well, one thing is, when you're getting too much momentum for one side of an issue, like an issue that has, 1, 2, or 3 sides that goes in there, that should activate skepticism. Are they missing something? So anything that's complicated should not have a consensus. There might be consensus because you need consensus to make a decision, but there should not be consensus on complicated issues. War and peace, whatever it is that happens there. Do you say yes or no to a complicated deal? What to decide to do on the weekend? Do you go to see a movie? Do you get soup dumplings? Do you go see a play? Do you go to see stand-up comedy? There should not be consensus. Like, people are their jagged personality profiles are so different from each other. There should be multiple things considered at the time. So anytime there is extreme momentum and direction in how people are thinking, immediately look for, what are we missing? So that's going to be definitely like part one.
The key question is, what are we missing? And I'm actually curious, Dylan, I think you're probably the best contrarian independent thinker that I know. I'm curious what question arises for you. This is actually one of the places where Dylan's great at dissent. Maybe not at giving feedback, but certainly at holding unique opinions. What goes on in your head?
Well, thank you, Ben. Well, first of all, to me, I think, going back to the topic of curiosity, right? How do you build a model of the world based on some sort of first principles that I know to be true, as opposed to adopting, knowledge that is passed on to me. That's the kind of the primary frame of mind, I think. Yeah, and whatever construct or whatever opinion or whatever kind of final decision that's presented to me, it's far less satisfying than compared to having trying to have an understanding of like, okay, I know XYZ to be true, and based on XYZ, then I can arrive at this conclusion this way. And it doesn't actually work necessarily all the time, right? You can get stuff wrong because your reasoning is not perfect, but at the very least, it's your own reasoning. So it's not someone else's reasoning, and so that's comforting and satisfying.
Well,
So,
well, Dylan,
yeah.
I think you hit day 2 of the challenge, which is throw your counter norm ideas out there and be willing to be wrong. And then if you're wrong, just acknowledge that. And that's another way of deforming
Right.
defense. Less defensiveness, fewer biases, and more. You get and higher distress tolerance. You get three benefits for one behavior, and you're wrong.
I'm curious about this distress tolerance, and some people call it anti-fragility. I want to ask you about, what do you think happens or is happening at a societal level, a national level, or even global level, right? Maybe one way to pose this question is that this kind of somewhat controversial or triggering question that people have come up with. I want to pose this question to you, Todd. Do you think words can be
No,
violence?
no. I think it's to me, and I have a feeling, Dylan. At least I think you're going to agree with me on this. As I believe precision has to be like uplifted in terms of importance. And so violence is a very clear category. And as soon as we end up bloating that category with things that aren't violence, now all of a sudden we can't distinguish between physical violence and words that are potentially problematic. And right away, we have those are two levels of difficulties that should not be mixed in the slightest. And I think you should always be looking for precision. And another example that falls into this in terms of like just kind of bloated terminologies is trauma. So I had an argument with one of my students this semester who's taking one of my college classes, and all I did was raise the question. So they said that they had an academic trauma in the past, and I asked the question with a tone of curiosity, not just a question. When you said academic trauma, were you referring to like a stressful event or trauma? So there's no like judgment really with the way that I just describe it in terms of the tone of my voice. And they were really mad at me of like, you're dismissing me. You are, you don't see me. You're dehumanizing me, this language that was coming at me. And I was like, hold on a second. Like my job, the reason that you or your parents pay for these college classes for me to teach you how to think. And the thing is, trauma has a very clear definition, and a negative stressor has a lot larger room for like what's a stressor that happens there. But there's very few academic traumas. And so I was curious because I hadn't heard that language before. And they didn't hear any of this. It was just like, no, again, like you think I don't know what a trauma is. I'm like, no, I don't know if you do because we never had this conversation before. So tell me what a trauma is. She's like, you don't deserve to know. And so it was an interesting conversation, and it relates to this, can words be violence, is that if you can't describe and define your terms precisely, you can't make headway into knowledge development.
And what is that precise definition of trauma? Because I think we started the call where the word narcissism gets thrown around a lot, but it's likewise, so does trauma.
Yeah. So if you go by the clinical definition, which is pretty good for a trauma, you're talking about a major life event that causes serious injury, potential death, or witnessing death as a result of what happened and causes significant distress or impairment. There's a lot there, right? So one is that the outcome has to include significant distress or impairment. If you don't have that, it doesn't count as a traumatic event, because many of us might have had parents or grandparents who are war veterans, but if you didn't experience significant distress or impairment, even being exposed to people dying and being on the front lines of warfare it's not a traumatic event for you. It's a potential traumatic event, but not a traumatic event. And if they claim it as such, they don't get it unless they have the significant distress or impairment. And also, in terms of the event, it has to basically be like worldview changing. Has it rearranged your worldview? Has it caused significant injury, insult, or potential death, or the witnessing of death? That's the definition of a trauma. And so once you have that clear, precise definition, there was my colleagues and I were involved in a back and forth with some scientists because someone wrote a paper in the British Journal of Psychiatry of saying how they saw the end of Bambi getting shot, and that was a traumatic event. And we wrote an article challenging that, of saying, no, like Bambi had a trauma. Now, if Bambi's friends were right there in the woods and saw her get shot and killed, they could have had a trauma. You watching a cartoon version of a deer getting killed is not a traumatic event. Basically, is like you didn't like the movie that happened there. So it's very important to not include someone who gets hit as a pedestrian by a truck in the middle of the highway and someone watching the end of Bambi. Let's not equate those two things, just like words aren't violence.
Yeah. The word trauma, man, it is so incredibly overused. I was at I think a spa or something recently randomly, and it's like a bunch of young girls having this conversation I overheard, and they all seem extremely well off, and and having this spa day and like having a beautiful moment or whatever, and they were talking about all this like kind of, so there's this terminology that's arisen around trauma. It's like everything is trauma, right? Like someone told you that you need to work harder, or like got feedback from your boss, or I don't know, like this minute things that really kind of part of life is now categorized as trauma, which is just crazy.
You don't even have to know the word stoicism, but you have to adopt to function well as a human being for 20, 80 to Dilan's 500 years. Is like just try not to offend people and try not to be offended. The problem with trauma is, to me, I sort of understand what people are doing, but I'm not a fan of it, which is I'm going to put a placeholder in here so I basically get a force field of psychological protection from whatever we're going to talk about next. And that's the opposite of our prior conversations about developing distress tolerance. You don't get a get out of jail free card with this word. That's not why the term was designed, and that's not why we try to help people. That will directly impede your ability to get over said trauma or said negative life event.
Todd, so yeah, it's such an important topic. And again, the book, Coddling of the American Mind, got a lot of attention recently, talking about a similar set of issues that these all these indicators like great inflation and people kind of getting upset over words as violence, and then there are certain political movements that take place around these things, and then a whole new ingredient that's being added to this complex situation is AI, right? Something like 800 million people, probably growing, are talking to ChatGPT and LLMs every single day. And these LLMs are designed and trained using RLHF to respond positively and affirmatively to everything that you say, right? And I'm curious, what do you think about the effect of this is going to be when everyone's talking to someone, an entity that is designed to be sycophantic, right? And we know this from studies that they in fact are sycophantic. And so, what is the social macro effect of this?
Yeah, so this is the fun speculation about the future part of our conversation. These are my hypotheses. Is people's need for certainty and their need for structure is going to skyrocket. Their ability to tolerate discomfort, uncertainty, complexity is basically going to decline significantly. And what's going to happen is it's going to have this really unfortunate indirect effect on socializing because you cannot control or predict other people's behavior. And so what's going to happen, what I worry of, is you're going to have a greater propensity for people to choose homophily, which means being around people that are similar to you in ideology, values, personality, which also means not exploring other cultures, not dealing with the anxiety of travel. All of those things are going to be so unnecessarily difficult if you're used to, this real positive social interaction reinforcement, which just doesn't match up with what happens in reality.
So then what is the counter for this? Like how do we create a world where we're increasing comfort with discomfort and the ability to share real ideas and disagree or have distress when it seems like all of the vectors are moving towards this coddling?
I have tons of thoughts about this. One to me that's important is, and I've been having this relationship with search engines before AI, ahead of time, which was when I'm socializing with someone, I have very few rules. But one of the rules is if we're asking questions and we can't figure out the answer, we can't turn to search engines. So at parties regularly, I'd be like, you know the rule. Like someone would say, hey, remember that movie Weird Science with that guy who was like, who's the big brother? And then someone's about to pull out their phone and look up on IMDb who that actor is. But no. We'll figure this out. And then I've explained to people a few times when new people come to social gatherings with me I'm like, because the answer isn't what we're going for. What's going to happen is we're going to think about that movie. Then we're going to think about other movies. Then we're going to think about what we were like as teenagers. Then we're going to have a much more rewarding conversation about what we were like as teenagers and how it was different from now. Then we're going to have a conversation about what do we wish we regret and did differently as a teenager. And we are going to miss this real, meaningful, intimacy enhancing conversation that all starts from as soon as you find the answer, the door is closed on the conversation that happens there. So to me, the reason I bring up that example is I think one of the answers of dealing with this in every fashion, right? Teachers, professors like me are worried about students using AI in the classroom is don't say yes or no. Clarify what the constraints are. Like, what are the times that you're not going to use it that happens there? And so I think it starts with socializing in terms of let's not use AI to write love letters and to ask it, like, how do we respond to our partner when they wrote something by text? I know we can do that, but you have to create constraints. You won't be perfect. Like, we'll all make mistakes. I've made mistakes and kind of checked in. I had a very strange text when I was in the country of Georgia last weekend, and a woman who's from the C-suite, I wasn't sure if she was flirting with me or not. So I just put the text into and described the emojis in AI and had a really cool, interesting answer. It was just like, I was in a different country. I had no friends with me. We're in a different time zone. So I didn't have my wise counsel. So I kind of just checked in and it was useful. I rarely ever do that. It happens there. And so in the classroom is I very clear for the students of, I expect you to use AI for the simple things. There shouldn't be grammatical errors. Throw it in there and make sure. Try to put things in active voice versus passive voice. But what I want you to do is pay attention to how to change your writing so you got a quick writing lesson. But if it's having your ideas, you're going to get a 0 on thing. And I'm looking for it. And I'm clear with them. You can use it for 1, 2, and 3, but you can't use it for 1 and 2. And you know what? It's the first semester. I've had no AI problems with any student in my class because I've been very clear about it. And I think we could do that, when Dilan has his 5 test tube babies that come out with particular personality profiles as programmed and they pop out, is that he could have rules in terms of like, all right, in the household when we're having conversations, like when would you use AI or search engines that comes in there? And I think it's more helpful that way.
Thank you so much for being with us today. And to our listeners, hit that like button, subscribe button, and give us some love and leave comments, ask questions, tell us how we can do better. As Todd mentioned, you can help us truly. It would be a great gift. Any feedback that any of you send us. So appreciate all of you for listening. And And we'll see you next week with another amazing guest. Thank you.